President Trump proposing a new budget that would mean major funding cuts for New York City. Everything from education to the NYPD to Meals on Wheels for seniors to public housing. The reaction? You could just imagine. This morning we talked to the head of New York City's Housing Authority. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Up Close. I'm Bill Ritter. Political warfare was declared by New York Mayor de Blasio after President Trump released his proposed federal budget for fiscal 2018. This is just the first salvo. With the mayor running for re-election and now freed of any threat of indictment for improper fundraising, leading the charge boldly on behalf of cities, and his city, the largest in the nation. No final numbers yet, but Mr. Trump's budget cuts could result in at least $100 million worth of cuts to public schools, $150 million to public housing, cuts in infrastructure projects like the 2nd Avenue subway extension, and to Meals on Wheels for seniors, and $190 million in cuts to the city's counterterrorism efforts. With more on the impact, here's Eyewitness News reporter Jim Dolan.
The security cameras that keep an eye on New York hotspots like Times Square, the radiation detectors carried by cops on the beat that would alert them to a dirty bomb, the detectors that check backpacks for signs of explosive residue. Since 9/11, all this is paid for by the federal government, and all of it is now threatened by President Trump's budget.
Under the president's proposal, nearly all federal funding to the NYPD would be eradicated. This funding is absolutely critical. It is the backbone of our entire counterterrorism apparatus.
Remember the bombing in Chelsea this summer? The device that was found on West 27th Street that did not explode, that was dismantled by the NYPD bomb squad that is paid for with federal funding. Those numbers add up to big savings for the federal government, no doubt about that, but also potential real problems for New Yorkers. For example, the president's budget virtually guts funding for public housing, stripping the city of $150 million.
Money for elevators and roofs and exteriors and, and windows, bathrooms, kitchens.
Boilers.
Boilers, things that people need every day just for the basics in living.
Jim Dolan, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
So what could this really mean, this big cut in an important New York City agency? Joining us to shine a bright flashlight on all this, Shola Olatoye, Chair and CEO of the New York City Housing Authority, the nation's biggest by far, really, right?
That is correct.
Biggest in the world, I understand.
That is correct. We have about 5% of the New York City's residential units are ours. 1 in 14 New Yorkers rely on us for some form of home. And I think, what is so concerning about this administration's budget is, as the country's largest housing authority, as, this tremendous and really the city's most affordable housing for New York's working families, it's really the federal government attempting to walk away on its obligation. I think you heard the mayor and our allies across the country are not going to take this sitting down.
$6.2 billion in proposed cuts to HUD nationwide, but $150 million, is that what you're looking at right now?
So I think it's important to know we get two sources of funds from HUD. The first is operating. So these are things that, the men and women who make NYCHA run on a daily basis, who pick up trash and respond to maintenance requests, who, help people move in and out of units. That's the operating funds. And the proposed cuts would suggest something like $150 million come out of that budget. What does that mean? For every $10 million is 100 people. We have 178,000 units. We literally power, what would be the size larger than the city of Miami. The second piece of funding that we get is our capital funds, and this is where it is most distressing. Almost a 68% decrease in funding, which means we get $300 million a year that gets slashed to about $100 million. Elevators, boilers, windows, doors, things that people need in order to move in and out of, and live, is essentially being cut.
So I just want to, understand that you have a $3.2 billion budget. You're talking about losing $200 million in capital expenditures.
That's correct.
Capital budget, and then $150 million for your operating, for a total of $350 million. That's
right. Now, two different sources of funds. There's also our Section 8 program, which is also some proposed cuts as well, which we also receive, there was an estimated $400 million proposed national decrease as well as part of this budget.
So it's roughly 10% of your budget would be eliminated.
That's right.
This is not something, I take it, that the New Yorkers, it would be easy for them just to say, okay, we'll raise our taxes and make up for it.
No, look, NYCHA has been in crisis for 20 plus years. We've lost already $3 billion of federal funds to this vital affordable housing resource.
Over how many years?
Since 2001.
Okay,
And
so since President Clinton and Andrew Cuomo was Secretary of HUD, you've lost all that money.
That's correct. So, we already start from a place of, we have $17 billion in capital repairs that are needed. We have buildings that are 60 years old or longer. Our residents, New Yorkers, understand what these cuts mean. It means elevators that don't work, roofs that leak. And what we've done over the course of the last 3 years is really make some demonstrable progress in actually chipping away at some of these problems.
Lights in the hallways.
Lights in the hallways, lights in our developments. We're replacing roofs. The mayor gave us $1.3 billion that is allowing us to literally put roofs over people's heads, having a direct impact, I might add, on some of the health impacts like mold and chipping paint and the things that we know our residents wrestle with. So we've made a tremendous amount of progress. A lot more is needed, and New Yorkers don't want to go backwards. The Next Generation NYCHA has been real, and we intend to fight these cuts at every step of the way.
Let's just talk about the socio-economic impact of this. These are low-income people who desperately need housing and who could not afford housing in a very expensive New York City otherwise. It has been the federal government's responsibility and New York's responsibility to put them in housing. If they don't get those housing, if you have to kick people out, for instance, or if all of a sudden the conditions just are not warranting people to wanting to move in, where do they go? They join the already 60,000 people that are homeless?
I think that's a very good question, and it's a very scary proposition in a city where we have, half of the apartments at $800 or less. So these are, very affordable rents made possible by the federal government, and we know that we have a 1% vacancy rate. So our units are filled probably to capacity, and they're affordable to families who are making $25,000 a year on average.
So really the people at the bottom of the economic scale.
That is correct.
Mr. Trump knows all this. He grew up here. He's a developer here. His father was a big developer in Queens. He grew up in Queens. He understands the fragile nature of some of this housing and affordable housing. This was just the first salvo and the first volley in the budget negotiations. Yeah, you're already on a full court press, you and all the other commissioners and the mayor, to make this happen.
New Yorkers, we don't have time to engage in sort of the intellectual debate, particularly at the Housing Authority. We've already experienced some cuts just under HUD's sort of regulatory, just at their discretion. We've received about $35 million in decreases just in January and February of this year. So the time for us to sort of wait is we don't have that time. I don't know what President Trump knows, but I do know he responds to the importance of economic input, and he's talked about the importance of infrastructure. NYCHA contributes $7 billion to this economy every year. The top 3 employers of our residents are public systems, NYPD, Department of Education, and NYCHA itself. So literally the people who are powering this city are in this worker housing.
You mentioned that we have first responders there who are living in public housing.
Absolutely.
Half the people, I read somewhere, half the people who are able-bodied, who can work, actually have full-time jobs.
Absolutely, and they work. And so again, this narrative of who lives in public housing, I think really needs to be changed. And we're doing a lot of work with our colleagues and our newly launched Fund for Public Housing, which is our social venture, to really try and change that narrative from extraordinary Americans like Howard Schultz and Lloyd Blankfein to the everyday ordinary Americans like your teacher's assistant. They live in public housing, have lived in public housing, and it is an asset worthy of preservation.
And our own Whoopi Goldberg for it.
And our own Whoopi Goldberg, right. Absolutely.
Ben Carson, I wonder are you going to approach him, because he has talked about this. He once lived in public housing as a kid. He has no experience in this other than that. What can you do for him? What can you do to approach him to get him to talk about it?
Well, so I've invited Secretary Dr. Carson now twice in letters I've sent to invite him to New York to see firsthand. He grew up in veteran housing actually, and I think, but regardless, it was publicly assisted housing. And I think it's important for him, and he spoke about this in his confirmation hearing, the importance of health in housing. As a surgeon, he should understand, you know, if you can eradicate mold and other issues that actually have health impacts on young people and our older residents, that actually has a broader social impact and potential cost savings, which should matter to this administration.
So this has been round one, and you start round two next week.
Absolutely.
All right. Shola, Olatoye, thank you very much. Good luck.